literal instructions of the prompt, but that's up to you. That happens every time I grade essays. And like, oh, I thought it was change. It says comparison in the question. But tests make people nervous. People do weird things. Whatever. I don't care. It doesn't matter. So that's something you don't have to worry about. So last week, what we talked about was the context and the thesis. Correct? Thesis has the format of X, A, B, Y. X being a lesser or not as important point. That is up to you how you decide which one it is, whether that's a comparison or a contrast. This is why pre-writing is so important. You take several minutes, you jot out your ideas, and then you make a decision. You do not start writing right away without having thought that out, because what happens if you start writing and realize, oh, I should flip this? That's a problem. That's why we pre-write. That's why I require it. And there's nothing like a hubristic senior who thinks they don't need to prepare, who then gets stuck. Hubris, my favorite of all tragic flaws, excessive pride. We all have pride in ourselves. I understand the irony of me talking about excessive pride. I get it. However, at some point, know that your limitations exist for a reason, and you should be mindful of them. And all of us, when we're stressed, when we're tired, when we have senioritis raging like the hormones of a 15-year-old, it is going to be a challenge for you to stay focused and to stay prudent. And we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to do that. So pre-writing is one of those little checks to give you a pause and to process and make sure you're doing the right thing. Because if y'all are doing the right thing, you're going to crush it. Again, I'm expecting a record crop of 5s again. Last year was the best year I ever had, and that was not the strongest group of kids. You guys are much stronger from what I know 2 years ago. And with 3 years of doing this same thing over and over again, you've probably written 25 of these essays by the time you finish this year, if not 30 or even more. So this should not be difficult. It should not be. All right. And then, of course, A, B are your 2 major ideas, whatever you decide they are. You want to use the language of the question and the format. You want to say things like a major change is blank, a major contrast. Say stuff like that. Why it's a good signal to our graders. You've heard me speak of this before, many of you. You know that they get together and grade all of the reading in one place. They've already announced that the reading will be virtual for this upcoming year again. So that makes it even harder on them. Because for many people, the reason they go to the reading is to catch up with old friends. People from all across the country they made friends with for many years, and they get to see them. And they didn't get to see them last spring, and they won't get to see them this spring. So that takes away a lot of the incentive for the reading, is the socialization part of it. So they're going to be even more bored and even more distracted when they're grading essay number 800, and you're number 801. So using the language of the question is really important. Setting up so they just have that rubric right next to your paper, and you just check the boxes for them because you're using the words in context, comma. That stuff helps. It's not good writing. Don't do that on your college application essay. No, but do it for this. Make it easy on them. Help them give you that check. Give that grade. All right, so now we're moving on. If you go to the rubric, the second line talks about evidence. The left box talks about specific examples. There is not a magic number, but I have never seen an AP student with any idea what they're talking about not get that first evidence point. So in the old days, it was 5 facts, it was 10 facts. They actually put numbers on it. Now they don't do that. They just say, like, do you have a sense that the kid knows what they're talking about? In a 5-paragraph, which is our perfect essay, 5 paragraphs, in a 5-paragraph essay, you're telling me you don't have enough evidence to make your point? I doubt it. So I should never see a 0 on an essay for us. Never. Your worst, oh my God, I can't believe I did that poorly, should still be a 1. Because even if you don't answer the question correctly, like you don't compare things or you don't contrast them or whatever, I should still be able to give you the fact points, because you at least say facts about the topic. So if it's about the Renaissance, you at least tell me like what the Renaissance was, even if you don't talk about the causes like you should have. So your worst case scenario should be a 1. No zeros, no zeros, no zeros. Okay? Your second evidence point is that you are taking the evidence that you give, the facts that you present, and you are tying it back to your thesis statement. So, as we will discuss in just a minute, ideally your second paragraph is a larger expansion of your X point. Your third paragraph is a larger expansion of your A point. And then, pattern continuing, your fourth paragraph is a larger expansion of your B point. In each of those paragraphs, 2, 3, and 4, ideas X, A, and B. You should be making reference to your thesis and how that evidence fits into it. Let me say that one more time. In paragraphs 2, 3, and 4, all three of them, you are referencing how the evidence you have given proves that comparison is more significant, or that that's a lesser cause, or whatever the format may be. What's the easiest way to do that? Literally have a stock phrase that you end your paragraphs with. I know it's not good writing. Again, don't do that in your college application essay or your essays in school next year or your current events papers, but it gets you the points. One of the reasons old-time teachers complain about this format for the test is they say it doesn't promote good writing. They're right. It doesn't promote good writing, but we ain't about good writing in here. We'll save that for other things like current events. This is about getting points. Naked ambition, okay? It's called naked because there ain't no clothes on it. We're just being like, I'm trying to pass and get what I'm trying to get. I'm not trying to improve myself, not trying to become a better human being or a better writer. This essay is literally about checking boxes and getting points. And the College Board would not want me to say that, but it's true. So I usually like to make fun of old farts as I slowly become one, but in this case, they're not wrong. It does, the essays I used to get were much better because they had to be. This format is literally a grocery list. Yeah, I got the butter. Yeah, I got the whatever. Got that. Yep, that's what it is. So write that way. Well, Mr. Rich, I want to express myself. Do that in other ways. Why are you doing that here? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Go dance in a field or write a poem or make a video or whatever you want to do. I don't care. God bless creativity. But, and you all know I support that. One of the reasons I don't have notes and say, because that way it makes me come up with different examples off the top of my head, which keeps me more focused on what I'm teaching, since this is like the 35th time I've taught this material. Literally. So to keep me engaged, I don't write down examples, and then sometimes I pull out one from 10 years ago I haven't used, or sometimes I make up a random one, and sometimes they don't work at all, as I'm sure you're aware of. But for me, that's a way to keep me engaged with the material and not just mail it in. That's why I come up with random metaphors that sometimes are too random. But for me, it's a way for me to stay engaged. So I need you to understand that this is not a creative process. This is a lab report. This is chemistry. Physics. Here's what I did. Here's my methods. Here's my experiment. Here's my, hypothesis. Here's my results. Here's my discussion. Same format every time. That's what this should be. Clinical. Okay? So paragraphs 2, 3, and 4 tie your evidence back to that thesis. While this evidence is important, however, it shows that the similarity is not as important as the difference because give a reason. Whatever that reason is. And that's how you end each one of your paragraphs 2, 3, and 4. Does that make sense to everybody? I know you've heard this before. All right, the third and final row of information, you have the analysis and reasoning, 1 point. That point is you are answering the question. So if it's compare and contrast, you discuss both. If it's changing continuity, you discuss both. All right? So this is where we start to lose a lot of points, because if we don't have both parts of the question, you can't get that. Or if your comparison is wrong, you can't get that point. Well, Mr. Rich, I had my 2 changes. I didn't have my 1 continuity. Well, then this point is for all of it. It's not half. There's no partial here. This is one of the reasons I grade like I do. There's not many points, and they all count. There's no partial. I need you to get used to that format, which is why I give 5-point grades, is one of the reasons. All right, so that is pretty simple. A lot of people will get 4s. They get context, thesis, evidence, and the first evidence point and the first analysis point. They don't get the second analysis point sometimes because you have to do it all 3 times, or second evidence point. You got to do it all 3 times. And some of you will do it twice or once or whatever. And then the last point. The so-called unicorn point. In AP World 2 years ago, less than 5% of kids got this point on the LEQ. I can't even really tell you what it is. There is no defined definition what makes this point work. This is called the lower the average point, is what I call it, because that's what its purpose is. None of you pesky nerds getting 5s. Okay? So it's about complexity. I know it says a whole bunch of other stuff there, but complexity. So this is why we do the X, is partially to try to get you this point. But we also want you to write a fifth paragraph that is not a conclusion. The fifth paragraph, I like to call it post-context. It's the same premise as the first paragraph, but instead of the previous time period, now you're telling me what's next. Same subject, same place, what's next? So in a period 1 essay, in theory, you're going to tell me about period 2. Of course, that's difficult at this point because most of you don't know the subtle nuances of European history from 1648 to 1815. You will later. So this is a point that many of you will not understand and get, if at all, until we get to review in March and April. So if you are someone who is a slow writer, because we got to do these in 40 minutes. And if that's hard for you, don't even attempt this. One of the things I have conversations with sophomores all the time is, if you're not good at something, get everything else done first, and then you do it if you have time. So if you know you're not the fastest, or you're just out of practice, or you don't know because it's been a while, only do this if you run out of time. And then the other thing is, when I give you time to do this, your first practice essay is a 2 out of 2, no matter what you do, assuming you write anything at all of any substance. Give yourself 40 minutes. Well, Mr. Rich, I spent an hour and 5 minutes. Why? Like, you're not going to get 25 extra minutes. That makes no sense. Well, I just wanted to see if I could do it. I want to see if you're fast enough, and I'm in charge, so do what I say. Please. 40 minutes, that's it. The longer you give yourself, the more you're lying to yourself. Okay? Does that make sense? So just so we are clear, let's go through that ideal situation. Let me get at my whiteboard here. What does our essay look like? Every one of you should have this written down, typed up, something. I should have already pulled up Zoom. My apologies, but I just didn't think about it. Here we go. At least it connects quickly. All right. So we have a 5-paragraph structure for an LEQ. This will also be the structure for a DBQ with a couple short differences. Okay, number 1 is context, and then thesis. Those both go in the first paragraph. So that is our ideal essay. Context, which is 3 to 4 sentences, same subject, same place, previous time, background info, the yellow scroll at the beginning of a Star Wars movie, whatever you want to call it, any sort of streaming show where the first minute is last week on old shows that, were produced before streaming. You're watching an episode of Seinfeld or something, or Friends, last week on, and it gives you a 30-second rundown. That's what this is. Not the rundown of what happened 4 seasons ago, not the rundown of what happened on another TV show, but a rundown of what happened on that TV show last week. Same subject, same place, previous time. Then the thesis is in the same paragraph. X, your counter or lesser idea. A, B, 2 more important or main ideas. And then Y, a short explanation of why A, B is more important than X. A great word to use in your why statement is because. That is a thesis statement, not a thesis sentence. Those of you in AP Lang are being taught or will be taught, I can't remember exactly what the chronology is, to write a 1-sentence thesis. A 1-sentence thesis for us ain't gonna work. I need a paragraph, so it's a big paragraph. It will probably be the biggest paragraph by far in your essay. That's okay. Mr. Rich, why isn't the thesis a separate paragraph? Because there are some old-time farts. AP Euro is way older demographically by teacher than AP World. And so there's people that like the thesis has to be in the first paragraph. And so those people believe that. So if your thesis is in the beginning of the second paragraph, even if it's functionally correct, they will not give you credit for it. Those people exist, and so we're pleasing them. Second paragraph is your X expanded, A is third expanded, fourth is B expanded. You are doing two things. You are providing facts and you are answering the question, supporting that thesis. And straight up say it. 5, post context, same subject, same place, next time. All right? And this happens in 40 minutes. And this is 15% of your grade on the AP exam. And if you look on the rubric in my class, this is worth 3 points in mastery when we do these. This first one will be progression, 2 out of 2, as long as you turn it in and you attempt the essay. If you turn it in with 1 paragraph, no. You attempt 5. Or as close as you can get to 5 in 40 minutes. You guys should be able to write 4 paragraphs in 40 minutes. If you don't get to the 5th, either out of it's hard or you just run out of time, that I can understand. But if you write a 2-paragraph essay and tell me that's the best you can do in 40 minutes, you don't belong in my class, and I'm trying to be nice, but you just don't belong in my class. Especially for this one, because you know the subject because I've already given it to you. Does anybody have any questions about the format?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So do you want this typed, or can we like handwrite it like the
Either
test?
way is good. I'm good, Aiden. It doesn't matter to me. Good question. Obviously, we'll handwrite them when we return, but for now, whatever's easier for you. I've actually, from now on, even when we're back in person, I've discovered over the pandemic, the one thing I've learned that will help me long-term is that like current events papers submitted digitally are much easier for me to grade. And I tend to give better feedback when I type them than when I handwrite them. So I'm going to continue to have you all do current events papers through Classroom, even once we return. But for right now, Anybody else? Question? Okay, so your subject, let me stop sharing. Your question is what we're going to start talking about today and finish on Wednesday. So if you have any questions as we're going through directly related to this assignment, that's not cheating, that's smart. I don't want you to be worrying about content for this. This is practicing the format. So we are evaluating the extent which all the questions begin with, to which the French and English wars of religion are similar. So it's a compare and contrast. You are deciding, is X comparison or is X contrast? It doesn't matter. I'm sure I'll have both. It's up to you. You're making an argument. You are defending that argument. The X is to provide complexity that even, in most historical situations, we rarely know the truth. We're looking at long ago information. There's little that is passed down to us. Almost all the writers we have, especially in Europe, are rich, wealthy white men. We don't have really anybody else's perspective for much of that time. And so is that a true representation of the mood and attitude of the time? Who knows? It's like aliens 5,000 years from now judging Americans based on Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and Jeff Bezos. Yes, they're Americans, but I highly doubt they're representative of the population. Because they're 3 white dudes who are billionaires. That is not America in any way, shape, or form. Okay? That's not who I see right now when I look across my screen. So that's why history is best made when we argue its complexity and argue with ourselves, in fact. And that's what we're doing with the X point. Okay? Does that make sense? So, shall we? Let's do some wars of religioning. Ooh. Now, if you have access to Classroom, I have posted this Venn diagram, which is like 8-point font because there's a whole lot of crap going on. Okay? And you'll notice that the comparison points in the Venn are blank. I wonder what you could use that for if you wanted to. I'm serving it to you, kiddos. Whatever you do with it is your business. We start with France. Why do we start with France? Because, well, France is the most complex, and we might as well slay the, when I went to prison the first day, I beat up the biggest guy in the yard, so I became the baddest dude around. That's kind of how it works. So you go for the big one first. You don't wait. I also posted a bunch of family trees because we don't need to know. And if you look at them, some of you, again, your first instinct is, oh my God, all these names. We're looking at like 3 or 4 names on most of them per list. It's just giving you some context. So the other one that would be beneficial right now is the French house of Valois. The Valois have been the royal family of France by the time we get to the late 16th century, the 1500s, for 300 years. Like many royal families, we have seen some inbreeding. We have seen some accumulating of recessive genes. For example, one of the kings in the Middle Ages, Charles V, probably was a paranoid schizophrenic. Of course, back then they had no way to diagnose or help with that. There are times when he thought he was made of glass, and if someone touched him, he would break. So he refused to be in close contact with anyone. So he didn't see people for months at a time, which is problematic in a divine right absolute monarchy where the king makes all decisions. So that is part of this family. We start seeing that inbreeding, and the branches of our family tree start to fall off, and we just have a trunk, which is generally not a good thing. So the only people that we really care about, if you look at this family tree, and you should, are the last 2 lines. The bottom 2 lines are the only ones that we in fact care about. So just to show you how to read this document. All right, and I will share my screen at this point so you can at least see it for those of you that aren't able to see 2 screens, and then we'll move on from it. Okay. If I can get there, I have too many windows open. Let me get the right thing. There we go. There's the Valois. So in this version, the red are the monarchs. They're a little darker if you print it out. Any guesses what the parallel lines are next to a person in red? Any guesses what that might indicate?
They're married.
Instance of
They're
inbreeding.
married. Their marriage, correct. And then the line below them are their children. In what order do you think the children are organized?
Left to right.
But what about left to right? What about that?
Firstborn to lastborn.
Yes. So the oldest is on the left. They should be the king. French law prohibits female rulers. So if you're like, why do we skip over the girls? Because they're not allowed to be queen. You are given the title of queen if you are married to the king, but you can never have power. So that is something I need you to understand right away. A female ruler cannot be had in France. We never see one in the monarchical era in France at all. So we get to 1547. Francis I was the Renaissance king of France. He actually employs Da Vinci. And Da Vinci, when he dies in France, he has a couple possessions with him. And that's why today the world's highest concentration of Da Vinci paintings is in Paris, in the Louvre. Because all those paintings in his possession or painted for the monarch of France become French property and pass through the heritage until we get to the Louvre in 1789. And it's been an art museum ever since. So that's why I like the Mona Lisa, for example, most famously is in Paris and not Italy because of he was working for the King of France. And it's in a little town of Amboise. I've actually been. We have been to the house he lived in and saw some of his stuff. A few of it remains. And for me, as a historian and a cemetery nerd, I have been to see his tomb. It is in the middle of France in a little town called Amboise, which is something I will always remember. And he was my 4th and final Ninja Turtle Renaissance artist to see. I've seen all 4 of their tombs. So, and for someone who likes the things I do, that's pretty high up on my list. Now, Francis's oldest son, along with his wife, as you see, Claude, is Henri II, Henry II. Now, Henry is young. He is going to be in his late 20s when he becomes the king. You can see that he is married to a woman named Catherine de Medici. Is that the... Yes. So the Medicis have had the leaders of Florence, who are probably the greatest patrons of Renaissance art of the day. They also, their bankrolled the Pope, the Spanish government, all the exploration voyages. One of Lorenzo the Magnificent's son becomes Pope Leo X, he of Martin Luther trial. And then a grandson will become a pope later on. And then a cousin of that family, another Medici, will be married to the King of France. And she is probably the most important person in this story. There are really only two names I need you to know of all this. One is Catherine de Medici, and one is the young man on the far bottom right corner who will eventually be known as Henry IV. So let me say that one more time. Of all these names, and you're looking at like on the last two lines, you're looking around a dozen names. I only need you to know Catherine de Medici and then the guy of future called Henry IV. And as you can see, how many children do Henry and Catherine have? See if I can blow this up a little bit. Ooh, I can. Can I blow it up and move it? That's the
It
question.
looks like 7.
Nope.
No, 6.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They have 6. That's a marriage. Mary, Queen of Scots. Oh, we'll get to her. But that's another thing. Not to be confused with Bloody Mary. That's a different Mary. Can you see how this becomes confusing? No matter what language they speak, there's like 10 royal names in the whole frickin' continent. So, like, we got Charleses in England, we got them in France, we got them in the German states, we've got them in Austria, we've got them in the Italian peninsula, we've got them in Sweden. Sweden, a person named Charles? Really? Yeah, we did. All right, so anyway, they have 6 kids. And if you were betting in the last year of Henry's life that there would be no grandchildren from that marriage, you'd have had massive odds against that. 6 kids, 4 boys among the 6, so we got 4 potential monarchs. Now, the sons of the daughters could be king themselves, so they would be further down the line in theory, but they could be king. And as you will see, none of them have any children. Not one of the 6 will have a viable adult child. It is remarkably shocking. Okay? But we'll come back to that in a minute. So Catherine de Medici, Henri II, a name that we will come to see very often. Henry, a lot of Henrys in this story. Okay, so going back to our Venn diagram, I'm going to talk you through this. I got a couple clips to show you. France is a nation in 1562, which is when this all starts, or gets ugly, shall we say, of about 16 million people. About 8% of them are Protestants. Less than 10%. Again, France did not have a Reformation. There was no sweeping through the land like there was in the German states or the Dutch area or Scotland or Switzerland. No. France, John Calvin, a Frenchman, left France because he was persecuted against because he becomes a Protestant. That's a good solid 50 years before this is happening. So that's already the idea is that religious toleration is bad. We don't want it. But we have some. Now, less than 10% of the population is Protestant, but half of the nobility are. Let me say that again. Less than 10% of the gen pop is Protestant, but over half of the nobility are, or about half. Now, again, that could be they have more money, so they pay less taxes because there's not an organized French Protestant church, so they keep more of their money. It could be that they are just doing it to antagonize the royal family. It depends on each family's reasoning, but it's a much higher proportion of the noble population is Protestant than the general pop. Because part of the question you may have here in a few minutes is, why does the monarchy care so much about Protestants? They're less than 10%. This is not a time of diversity or supporting inclusion or multiple ideas. Just crush them or ignore them. Well, it's because so much of the nobility is Protestant, we have to listen. Remember, until you get to the 20th century and you start having income tax, your richest nobles are most often richer than the royal family. And we will talk about 3 families here. The royal family is the poorest of the 3. So, we have, and all this is on the Venn diagram. I'm not going to write it out. I'm going to talk you through it. So if you're taking notes, great. If you need to look how to spell something, pull up the diagram. If you want to print it out for next time, feel free, if you have that capacity. Or just look at it digitally, whatever. But you have the Guise. The Guise are Catholic. They want to be the royal family. They would love that. Well, it's not looking good in 1559 when we've got young, still in their 30s, royal couple with already 6 children. Not looking good for somebody else to take the throne. We, of course, have the Valois. They are already, I mentioned, our monarchs and have been the monarchs for 300 years. Well, Mr. Rich, how are they not the wealthiest family if they've been monarchs for 300 years? Because they spend more money than they have. It's estimated after leaving professional basketball, 70% of NBA players are broke in 5 years. 70%. Because when you've had no money, which most of us don't have millions and millions of dollars, and most people who become rich and famous athletes or musicians are not coming from positions of wealth themselves. Some do, but most don't. You don't know how to properly manage it, and you waste it. Yeah. Okay. And then lastly, as we say in Kentucky, the Bourbon family. In France, Bourbon. The Bourbon family. And their family symbol, the fleur-de-lis. Huh. How does Louisville get that? This is normally where I talk about the connection between Louisville and Louis XVI and the statue downtown in Jefferson Square Park, which is no longer there because it's been removed because it was a subject of protest, because Louis all around was a fairly terrible person. Although he did support the American Revolution and allow us to become an independent nation, so whatever. And one of the strangest things of 2020, whenever the hand of the statue of Louis XVI was removed in some of the protests way back in June, his supposed heir got on Twitter and was throwing shade at Louisvillians for removing the hand of his ancestor statue. 2020. If you'd have told me that a year ago, I'd been like, excuse me? Like, what? We live in strange times indeed, young folk. So, anyway, just anytime someone says, I know what's going to happen in the future, no, they don't. Shut up. No, we do not know what's going to happen in the future. It's, yeah. So anyway, 1559, a tragedy will occur. If I had a nickel for every time I'd say this, I'd be very rich. The young monarch of France was killed in an accidental jousting accident when a lance went through his eye. We've all been there. Okay? Now I have a minute and a half clip I want to show you, which describes the accident in graphic detail. So if you're a little squeamish, I apologize, but this is too good to pass up. So